Good evening. Thank you for joining us for Crop and Garden Record Keeping webinar. My name is Sharon Sandman. I am with Native American Producer Success Project. The Crop and Garden Record Keeping we have listed here as Benita Litson, Land Grant Office Director. At this time, I will turn it over to Benita. Go ahead, Benita.
Good evening. De Benita Litson India. Syndikin and small company versus team here on a totally additional auto ateli de shiaho. I've been raised here in the Saley Wheatfields area. And I work for the land grant office as the director of the land grant program here at Diné College. Why is record keeping important? One of I guess the most important thing is really understanding what your production goals are, what types of things that crops that you are wanting to grow on your farm. So you could either be a vegetable producer, fruit producer, hay, forage producer. So you could be any type of, of farmer growing multiple crops also. So some of the things that are important as you go into planting or harvesting is really understanding the types of crops you want to grow. So going in, you want to at least have a goal in regards to what you're thinking of planting and growing. So if you're a beginner farmer, it might be that you're starting as a backyard gardener, that you're just going to grow in a, something like a 20 by 30 space that might even be too big sometimes. So what are the things that you are thinking about growing? Is it, if it's vegetables, you want to think about what types of vegetables you're going to grow. There's some plants that mature, quicker than others, and even the way they grow is very different. So some might vine out a little bit. So thinking about all of that ahead of time as you move forward into your growing season. Also, it helps you as a producer to improve upon what you are doing. So whether you're been growing crops for the past 10 years, you're always going to learn something different. I think every year, just because you're either come up with a new obstacle, you might have an infestation of a different weed that might be coming into your field, and how to mitigate that particular obstacle. The other could be that you never grew a certain type of crop and you didn't really do your homework in regards to how it grows, whether it vines out or it grows in a bunch, how much it produces. So you have to kind of adjust to those types of growing environments. The other things are, I think, the most important as we move forward as food producers are food safety standards that are now in place, and how we try to grow safer foods for not just our own families, but if we're going to sell to a farmer's market or to a school or other entities. But really learning how to do record keeping. And I want to say that it is hard. It's hard to do. It's a little bit tedious sometimes. And I always try to encourage folks to at least start, jotting down, carry a notebook with you, jot down when you go out to the field, what you see that day, what's the weather like, what types of things are you noticing. The big things are really thinking about the days that you're going to plant. And prior to the day you're going to plant, how are you prepping your soil? What types of things are you going to do before you plant? Are you going to plow? Are you going to disc? Do you have to make furrows? What's your irrigation system like? Are you flood irrigating, sprinkler? Are you doing drip system? So all of those has to be taken into account as you start planning what you are going to be growing within that season. So those are some of the important things of why you would be keeping records of your crop production. Second, what other types of information do you want to keep in your records? You want to make sure you have planting dates. You might create a schedule, just like I said. So if you're doing, say you're growing for a school and you're having to meet a contract and telling folks that you're going to produce X amount of pounds or a bushel of this particular crop on this day, you're going to kind of have to, plan back, meaning understand the plants that you're growing. Like if it's a spinach, when are you expecting to harvest? Is it like a 30, 45-day harvest point? So if that's the case, you're going to plan back. So if it's 45 days, you're going to plant, 45-day. You have to give yourself at least 40 to 50 days to be able to harvest that crop and be able to get it out to your consumers. Or if you're relying on, like, say, farmers markets, you're wanting to keep an inventory. So you're going to stagger your planting schedule. So you might plant spinach 1 week, and then maybe the following week follow up with another, row of spinach, and kind of do that throughout, the first part of the year. You also have to understand the types of plants you're planting. So like you have root crops, which are usually cool season um, crops, and so you can plant those a little earlier. And if you have a shorter growing season, like we do here in Taylor, you might want to incorporate like a hoop house, create some seedlings so you get them started earlier, and then you transplant. But that also takes a lot of extra planning that needs to happen. You also want to keep track of your irrigation. So depending on where you are, whether you're hauling water on your own, putting it on a drip system, you still have to figure out what your schedule is going to look like. Um, for us in the wheat fields area as hay growers, there's 133 farmers, and so we have the typical irrigation system where we would have to either share the amount of water with other farmers or schedule a date when you can irrigate. And if you're working, it's difficult to get out there every day and be there and irrigate, especially if you have large fields. So you really have to put in some time into scheduling that out for yourself. And sometimes like a water break or a pipeline that might have burst might put you back quite a bit. So you have to kind of adjust to a lot of those things. If you're a farmer or rancher, you're kind of having to adjust to all of these obstacles that may pop up. And so it's good to have a schedule, but I'm telling you, sometimes that schedule is hard to keep. The next ones are if you're applying herbicides or pesticides, you want to make sure you indicate the dates or who's going to be applying those for you. Fertilization dates, what types of fertilizer you're going to use, how are you putting it directly on the ground through your irrigation system? Is it liquid granules, that type of stuff? And that goes with your herbicide too. Also, your harvest date, as I mentioned earlier, each crop is going to have a certain number of days that it will mature and be ready to harvest. So make sure you really look at your seed labels. Um, Even for between squashes, um, if you look at the labels, the days of maturity really fluctuate, or they're different. It shouldn't say fluctuate. They're a lot different. So your viney plants usually take longer than say your zucchinis, and so you want to be able to adjust to those and understand if you're going to have enough help. I know with our corn producers, we have a lot of corn producers. I've noticed some of the elderly, they started staggering some planting, just planting their corn just because they have 10 acres of corn. And if they plant the whole 10 acres, they're going to be harvesting at the same time, the whole 10 acres. And the elderly usually don't have a lot of help anymore as they get older to harvest the corn. So they start staggering their corn planting dates so that when they're going to harvest, they're not harvesting the whole 10 acres. They're harvesting maybe 2 acres at a time. And so they kind of plan that out for themselves. So you would kind of do something like that for yourself if you're doing a small garden or if you're selling to a farmer's market. The other things you want to keep records of are income, income that's coming in, or any kind of profit, or your expenses. How much money are you putting into the farm or garden? Just to help you, it might be a hobby, but if you're trying to at least break even or start a small business, you want to at least turn a little bit of profit over. Um, if possible, keeping track of how much water you apply is going to be important too. Just because I think a lot of us on Navajo, not only larger scale, thinking about our water rights issues, but many of us don't quantify how much water we use or how much we need. And so when it comes to any types of water right mitigation or more water rights situation, we don't have actual amounts of water that we need or we would need if we were in full production, with our people. An example for our community farmers, like I said, we have 133 farm plots, but literally only 10% of us farm. But if 100% of us farm, would we have enough water to irrigate all of the fields? Um, and what would that look like? And so it really would help with really understanding how much water you apply. One thing I know we did in our community example is we asked everyone not to grow alfalfa, and that's something we used to always go to, just because it's a plant that would you would put in the ground, and also it would take several years for you to continue to get a harvest off of that. So we think it's an easier crop to grow. However, it needs a lot of water to be able to get a yield out. And we just don't have the water capacity or irrigation capacity to keep doing that. So we're constantly looking for other crops that may still allow you to yield, say, a hay field, but not need as much water as you would need to irrigate alfalfa. Moving forward, so as I mentioned earlier, what are you planning on planting? You know, annually or seasonally. Some folks they can grow through the winter. Just they might have a hoop house or a greenhouse that they're growing in. So you can figure that out as you move forward into understanding how you're able to grow in the different environments or different conditions. Um, so if you're planning for multiple crops, I have a picture there as an example. We have one farmer who's growing different types of squash, carrots, things like that in her hoop house, and you can see and melons. But you can see a lot of the viney plants kind of take over, and then she has several of the row crops, which are like the chilies, the tomatoes, um, that are also in there. But she's able to roll up the sides, so the vines are kind of going outside of the hoop house also, and being able to aerate that. But having to understand, how multiple crops would be able to grow amongst each other is important. Making sure you have enough space for like your viney watermelons or your viney Hubbard squashes, those type of things. And then if you're doing drip irrigation, like in this case, what are the emitter spaces? Where are you going to purchase your supplies from? So the other things I think you need to understand are cross pollination. So like if you're going to plant, white and blue corn or yellow corn, or you might have a neighbor that's growing a different corn. Really understanding and having that neighborly, friendly approach to folks, to be able to say, I'm planning to grow this. Let me know when you're going to plant this particular crop so that I am able to plan to, grow my crops around that schedule. I hear folks say most of the times the corn can be planted two weeks apart, so to avoid the cross pollination. But then I hear others say that we need it longer. So I guess it really depends on where you are and maybe how windy it might be. And of course, us on Navajo, it's pretty windy, so you're going to have a lot of pollen move across. Um, so other things, like I said, just understanding what if you have row crops, bunch crops, the crops that grow kind of in a bunch rather than lining out, just so that you can plan and map out your garden. The other things too are like water requirements. You could try to group your plants that need a little bit more water on one area of your field, and then you might put the other crops that might need less water on another section. So just really thinking about how you would plan out your planting schedule, your map, and how much time and effort you would be spending on each plant. We had a really good presentation by New Mexico State University, where an example was more for profit, but they were saying, say like a viney squash that would, take a long time, like 80 days to produce a crop, versus like a tomato where you can get cherry tomatoes in a much sooner time and be able to sell them much sooner and more to be harvested. And so if you really think about your time and your effort spent on each individual crop, you're going to be making a little bit more money on your cherry tomatoes versus squash, the viney longer growing squashes. So all of that could be taken into account depending on how serious you want to be as a farmer. If you want to, make a little bit of profit off of that, you probably want to do those type of calculations. Next, alongside those, I think creating a chart, there's a lot of, I was just looking online earlier, there's a lot of different charts that exist, that you can go off of. USDA has several different types of charts that you could use, whether it's dependent on, the climate in your area, the soil conditions, uh, like I said, your seeding chart, your planting chart, your harvest, pest management, irrigation, your equipment cleaning, equipment maintenance, all of that, you can start creating that as a part of your record keeping. And I know it sounds tedious, but I think if you're on top of a lot of these things, you're a little bit more ahead of the game in regards to the amount of time you're going to spend in your field and having some sort of production. I know some people, they plant and then they don't irrigate, and so they lose everything. Or either they have a lot of prairie dogs that infest the area and eat up the crop. So if you're not out there, the prairie dogs can take over, or the wildlife can take over. So planning your efforts to just be on site is also important. So your equipment, figuring out what types of equipment you need. Do you need a tractor? Do you own one? Do you need to rent one? Do you need to borrow one? What are the different implements that you might need to have? If it's a small garden, you maybe only need a tiller, or just your hand, your shovel, your rakes, that type of stuff. If it's really tiny, are you going to add manure? Do you need a manure spreader? What do you have? Gated pipes for flood irrigation? Do you have like the drip irrigation system, sprinklers? what types of things do you have and what do you think you're going to need? Um, and then understanding what additional equipment or implements that you may need as a grower and someone that's learning how to grow different crops. A lot of times we're finding example, my sister was growing Sonoran wheat last year, and to be able to harvest wheat, you need a special equipment, and so we had to borrow that and bring it all the way from another across New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, to harvest, the wheat. And it's not something that's cheap. It's hard to find. But if you're just growing, like we're only growing 2 acres to kind of test out how it is, it's a lot of work. So things like that, really understanding what you have and what you have access to is also important. I think the next biggest thing is going to be meeting your food safety. So as long as you're really good at having some sort of record keeping and making sure that you're documenting what you are doing in your farm and ways that you are mitigating food safety risks and concerns is going to be important. And if you're already doing it or you're already practicing some of that, yeah, I feel like you're ahead of the game. But there is so much information that still needs to be shared with our farmers in regards to meeting food safety guidelines. And there are several folks who are really moving forward in regards to understanding the practices and trying to implement them. Um, it is, like I said, it is tedious. There's a lot of paperwork that goes with it. But in this case, you would actually have an auditor come out and review your documents and take a look at your farmland to ensure that you are abiding by the things that you are saying you're doing in your farm to mitigate food safety concerns. So here, I think the main things are hygiene is a big section. So how are you training your help to make sure that they're not using the same shoes they're feeding their cattle with in the garden, so that you're not transferring like E. coli and things like that into your garden. Where is your irrigation water coming from? Is there maybe a farmland that's upstream that might have runoff that goes into your field? Are you trying to create barriers to make sure that doesn't come into your field? Are you growing crops that touch the soil, or are you growing crops that are um, cooked? Making sure that you're what types of crops you're growing. Also, as far as irrigation, so if you are growing a crop that touches the soil and you're flood irrigating, you're also increasing that risk by, water carrying any types of pathogens touching your crop. So you really got to kind of plan out figuring out how to keep those types of food safety concerns or risks out of your field. And so you want to be documenting how you're doing that. The other things are, do you have a wash station on site where someone can wash their hands, where the restroom is a little bit away from the field? Those type of things you would have to start documenting. So that's kind of really brief. So the next one I have, this was just an example that I found. If you're planning your planting schedule, say, and there's you all know there's so many different types of crops. Even if you're just doing squash, there's so many different varieties of squash, and so they're all very different. So you're going to have to do your research in regards to really understanding this. So at the bottom here, you'll see the months of the year, and then you have your crops on the left hand side. So it's telling you in the green is when you should be planting these particular crops, and the yellow is when you should be harvesting the crops. So like I said, There's so many calendars that already exist, so it's really good to kind of do your homework and figure out what you can handle. One thing for sure is we're really trying to make sure that you all, as farmers, have something on the ground all the time. So if you are, like a backyard gardener, maybe leave your residue behind just so that you're adding more nutrients to your soil in the next year if you're going to till it back in, but try to not keep anything bare. So don't just plow, till, and then walk away from it. Try to get something in there. Try to get something growing so it's holding down your soil. Even that you want to be able to document that. Um, the next slide is our last one, but it's just a simple sample record sheet that you can also create on your own if you have access to a computer. You can create a quick Excel spreadsheet, but literally it just kind of indicates the date, of course, of when and what you are doing. Um, Time, if you want to be a little bit more detailed, are you going out there in the morning, afternoon? Um, what was the weather like when you were harvesting? Was it windy? Was it raining? What was that day like? Did you have to put it off and maybe come back another time? And then um, what types of, like, if you have plots already, you might have like plot one, plot two, row one, row two. So you could be a little bit, I guess, on your farm that you would be able to document where on your farm you might be collecting or harvesting. But these are, and then the different types. So you can put in the crops that you are putting in on top here, and then document that. You might be weighing what you are collecting, so you could also put in the weight here too. Over here, you have things like were there any crops that were damaged, slightly damaged, that you can monitor, and you can indicate, kind of create your own scale. But that's a simple one. There's a lot that is out there, but I think the main ones, like I mentioned in slide 2 and 3, is creating your charts or your irrigation schedules. And so that's, those are the important parts of what you would be doing as a grower. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I want to go to a sample farm plan template. Do you all have any questions as I am transitioning to a new? So feel free to ask.
If you guys have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand or type your question in the
Put it in
Q&A
the
box or
chat.
chat box, right? Yeah, so while you're while we're waiting for you to do that, I do have one question on the part where you mentioned to, if you can monitor how much water you're using. Is there some sort of tool to use it, or to not to use it, but to measure how much water you're putting on your garden? Or
So
do you just guess?
if you're doing it, there is. So there is, you can have a flow meter. I think they sell like the smaller version of those, like the one that you can connect to a hose at like any of the hardware stores like Home Depot. Um, but one trick might be to say you have a drip line out, and you can put like a bucket or a cup underneath your drip line and time it. So if you're watering, say, for 15 minutes every morning, and you have, 100-foot drip tape, and you have maybe like 50 emitters on there, you can kind of get an understanding of how much water you're applying, just by your simple test. So you could put the cup under there and see how much is being dropped from each emitter. You could just test one emitter and then just kind of do an estimate. Okay, now I'm able to collect, say, a pint of water, and then times that by the 50 emitters that you have, and be able to kind of understand how much you're applying to that particular row. But if you're doing like flood irrigation, you can put a flow meter on, if you have pipes, you can put that on there and kind of monitor that. The other thing that's kind of hard, and you would have to do lots of math and is really understand, it's like, say you have a ditch system, you want to kind of understand how deep it is, how wide it is, and kind of figure out what the velocity of the water that's moving through, how fast it's going, and then monitor, like I said, the time, how much time you're applying that much water to your field. So you could do like a math and get an estimate of that. I hope that was helpful. But here, here's a template that we have been, we kind of started utilizing, and the folks that has shared this with us, they've been working with Hesperus Farms with Fort Lewis, not too far out of, I want to say between Durango and Kirtland area, Farmington. But they've been doing a lot of training for farmers to kind of get started growing for production and selling to farmers markets or restaurants. And they've been pushing them to meet a lot of the food safety guidelines. So this is one of the templates that they have been sharing with us, and we have been sharing with our farmers. But as mentioned, you would have an auditor come out and be able to audit your fields, but you want to make sure you have a lot of your documentation already in place. So you would have, they call it, what are they called? Safeties, like your standard procedure manuals. So an example might be, how many times are you monitoring your irrigation? Are you testing the water for different types of pathogens? On what days are you doing that? What lab are you going to? How are you collecting that? That type of information. You want to put those standard operating procedures together for almost every little detail. But you would put that all in a binder, and so your auditor would come out and kind of review your SOPs for different types of things, and just kind of monitor whether or not you're following through on that. So this is, if you're already doing that, you would have an auditor come out what days do you have that plan. Your personnel who's helping you, it might be your family, it might be your oldest son, or these are, like more for production wise, but really thinking about like who is helping you, who's helping you during the harvest, who's helping you package, who's helping you sell the product, and what types of training do they need, or what have they received and what is still needed. So these are the different types of training that you would offer is, like I said, hygiene, if they have illnesses, what are lunch breaks allowed, what types of containers are they bringing in? Is there a place where they could have breaks to eat? Are they wearing jewelry? How types of safe handling and produce spills? So if they spill something, how are they monitoring that? Where does that go? It doesn't go with the rest of the group that you might be selling to. How's the tools being cleaned? Where is the chemicals stored and handled? Your farm security might be something that you want to implement if you're a hemp grower. No, just kidding. Or marijuana grower. First aid procedures. So if somebody gets hurt on the farm, how are you going to, do you have things in place that is going to, get, let's say like a cut, do you have the bandages in place? How are you cleaning that? How are you marking that space off if they were harvesting? Your infraction policy. So if somebody is not abiding by your rules, how are you addressing that? What are the dates that you have created, like your corrective actions to talk to that person, that type of stuff. You actually have to go through a lot of this stuff. Traceability, this is where really understanding how many rows of a particular crop you might have, or naming your plots, or what they call it paddocks, or space. So you would have like your, field 1, field 2, field 3, and you might have them planted at different times. So you might just say, name your field 1, row this is where I got, things from. So that way, if anything, if somebody got sick from one of, a produce that was being sold at the farmer's market, they could trace it back to your farm if they had to. And you could really kind of go back through your manual and figure out what steps were missed. And maybe somebody came in sick and didn't abide by certain things, and you could follow back to all of that. So your traceability and recall is here. Do you have a team that looks at all of that? And like I said, you might have documentations on talking to the people that are helping you, your sales records, the labels that's created, who's buying. Do you have a receipt policy, mock recall form? So here's another one, a harvest information, shipping information, mock recall. So just making sure that you're documenting when you're harvesting, who's harvesting. If you're putting it in a cooler, how are you labeling that? How are you cleaning that material? Just making sure you have all of that on hand with you as an auditor is going to review your documents. Is your water potable? So like your wash station, when you're washing your produce, they want you to use potable water. And this kind of scares a lot of people because a lot of us are, our farms are way out there and we don't have access to potable water when we're there. But the farm that I was talking about in Hurstburg, they created their produce wash station, which has to be in a covered area, but they just have a huge barrel where they have water, and then they add in the chlorine at the right percentage to make it potable, and they're able to clean their produce and then dry it and then store it and then get it to your refrigeration as soon as they can. And then if you have your water, drinking water station, where that's located, your different types of facilities like your toilets, where is that located on your farm? So all of this stuff, you have to kind of document who's cleaning the toilets, who's in charge. Is it someone else that's not working on the farm? So there's so much stuff that when it comes to food safety that we have to kind of abide by. This one here is your farm field map. So I don't know if we'll have enough time, but there's several maps that you can create on your own just to make sure that your auditor understands there might be a corral upstream, to have them understand that you might have a potential risk of pathogens entering your irrigation system. But just talking about the different crops, the areas under cultivation, or your livestock production areas. So you would just want to create your own map. Here is just an area, an empty space. You can do this on a piece of paper. It's just figuring out where your field is, where the irrigation system comes in. Are you storing manure? Is there flooding? But really understanding all the different risks that would occur on your farm. But moving forward, where does your water source come from? Is it a private well, surface water? You would indicate all of this stuff so that your auditor or whoever's reviewing understands the different types of water quality concerns that may appear. The other things are your animals, wildlife, and livestock. For us, I think prairie dogs are a huge problem. Rabbits are a huge problem. But say on a harvest state, you want to make sure you walk through the field, and if you have like manure or droppings on a certain area of your field, you don't want to harvest that area for sale. So how are you flagging that so that whoever's harvesting is not picking the crop from that area? So you're just kind of creating a strategy that helps you to understand all the different risks that might occur on your field and how you're trying to avoid any types of contamination. Um, the other thing is your sewage or manure. Are you applying manure to your field? It has to be applied, I believe, 140 days before harvest, something like that. 120 days, I can't remember exactly the right days, but it has to be at a certain date that you can put on your field before harvest. So just going through, your compost, your soils, what types of, like I said, cultivation that you might have, really keeping track of a lot of the things that are happening around your farmland. We talked a little bit about the harvesting, field packaging, who is doing all of that. What are the containers being stored in? How soon is it getting to the refrigeration? Um, all of that you want to start thinking about. So this is where I think record keeping is really, really important as we become, food producers, I want to say, but making sure that we're producing safe foods for our consumers or even our household. So do we have a packaging area? What does our facilities look like? What are we packaging in? How often is it being cleaned? So lots of sort of detail information that's definitely needed. So I just wanted to share that with you. But there's so much information that's available. And I think just reaching out to an extension agent or someone that has been growing, actually out there in the field, growing different types of crops, picking their brain, um, having them share their stories in regards to their successes or even their challenges, to help you move forward sooner. It's harder when you just start from scratch. You don't know what you're doing. And sometimes, it takes you a few years to finally get it right. But if you're not persistent or consistent with trying to understand what's going on, you can easily give up on it. So I think having somebody to ask, or share those types of experiences is really, really helpful. You might have a neighbor that's already doing something like that. So really kind of picking at their brains. I know for livestock production, we have one producer who is really detailed on even birthdays for their calves, even celebrates with like the party hat with the pictures and stuff. So like everything, it's pretty detailed. But you can do that with your crops too. So it looks like we're already into an hour. So I will stop here and have you all ask any questions, and give you guys time.
Okay, so if you guys have any questions, again, raise your hand and I can unmute you. If not, you can type in the chat box or the Q&A box. But in the meantime, as far as the farm safety training, do you provide it? Does Diné College provide the training for the producers?
We are hoping to do something like that. So one of if one of our challenges on Navajo is we're in 3 states, and so prior to FSMA, each of the state had a different food safety module or training module. And so it was hard to really determine what the farmers needed per state. But now that FSMA is in place, there is curriculum that's already developed, standards, and there's already a lot of teaching tools that are available. So what we are trying to do is trying to kind of gather the approval process for us to offer these trainings and have it be acknowledged by the state. And why we're trying to do this is, with our shiprock growers, there are a lot of elderly, and so we had to sort of do translation of a lot of the information to them in Navajo. So even though we helped them go through the online portal modules, we also had meetings at one of the farmers' house and broke it back down into Navajo, just so that they understand it a little more. And so we're hoping to make some videos in Navajo and using like farmland that we're kind of used to seeing on Navajo, because when you look at the presentations, you're looking at like large producers, and that's like, you know, we're not used to growing like that, so we want to make it look a little more, you know, closer to home. So we are working on that. There are several of us, and I don't know whatever happened to that, but we were trying to become trainers. And so there's several of us that went through the train the trainer program where we can teach the FSMA information, but we need a what is it called? Another trainer that would kind of audit our training practices and to make us certified trainers. So we were going through that, and I know COVID all happened, and we kind of stepped away from a lot of things. So we probably need to get back on track soon.
Right. Okay. We have another question. Oh, it's just a comment from Carol. Really informative. Thanks for the great overview. So much information to cover. So, that's it in the Q&A box. But I would like to thank you, Benita, for your presentation. And I know it's a lot of things we overlook, but it is, in the end, that's what will determine if you're going to continue doing what you're doing. So since we don't have any questions, again, thank you, Benita, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. If you have any questions, or if you would like to look at the handbook Benita was showing us, just send us an email. Our email is there on the screen. And then don't forget to look at our Facebook page. There we have the past webinars on there, and then also on our YouTube channel. And then if you guys would like to be part of our monthly newsletter and information, when you guys exit, there's going to be a survey. Just go ahead and fill out the survey and provide your email address, and we'll get you on the list there. Again, thank you everyone joining us, and that concludes our presentation for this evening. Have a good evening, everyone. Stay safe.
The Native American Producer Success Project is a collaborative effort between Diné Inc., a nonprofit organization, New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service, and Diné College Land Grant Office. The project is funded by USDA Office of Partnership and Public Engagement, Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged, and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers Program. The goal of the NAPS project is to increase the profitability and long-term sustainability of Navajo farmers and ranchers. To achieve this goal, activities in 4 key areas are being undertaken to improve Navajo farm and ranch operations, increase Navajo farmer rancher knowledge of and access to available programs and technical assistance provided by the United States Department of Agriculture, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Navajo Nation, the New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service, the Diné College Land Grant Office, and others. We are strengthening the organizational capacity of the Navajo Farmer and Rancher Congress to address the current and future needs of Navajo farmers and ranchers, to facilitate Navajo farmer rancher use of USDA, NRCS, FSA, and RMA programs.